Delightful to know that I have many friends in the Knesset. I'm sure I have some folks that aren't so friendly. I get that too. This is Israel, after all.
Not a friend.
One of the things that I always appreciate about Israeli politics is that where two or more Israelis are gathered together, there are at least 7 different opinions about everything. There's an old saying that history is to a culture what memory is to an individual. And that is so very true. Because if I were to wake up this morning and not be able to remember my name or where I lived or who my family was or what I did for a living, I would be totally disoriented and lost. To lose one's memory is in essence to lose any sense of perspective. In many ways, history serves as perspective to a culture. And when people do not know their history, and they do not know where they've been, then they have no clue as to where they're going, because they're lost and disoriented. There are a lot of people in the world today who are disoriented because they have no concept of the history of who we have been as a world. Sadly, there are many people, even who do not understand who Israel has been as a country, and therefore has no idea where it should be going. I'm not here today to in any way suggest a course of action for Israel. That's the sovereign duty of a sovereign nation to decide, not the U.S. or its citizens. I am here to say that John Kerry's speech last week was without any historical precedent at all. No perspective. When he made the ridiculous and irrational statement that Israel can either be a Jewish state or it can be a democracy, but it can't be both, my first reaction was, Mr. Secretary, it is both. It is a Jewish state and it is a democracy. But as I realized, the only way that statement makes any sense at all is if you take faith and religion completely out of the equation of who Israel is. Then what he says may have some basis in meaning. Because the fact is, there is no explanation for Israel apart from God's unique and personal involvement not only in the creation of this nation, but also in being able to sustain it. There is no other explanation other than God for how Israel has been able to reassemble, how it's been able to maintain indigenous roots in this land for over 3,000, going on 4,000 years, for how this land has truly seen the dry bones live again and the desert bloom. I first came here in 1973, just months before the Yom Kippur War, almost 44 years ago. Over the course of these 44 years, what I've observed is that this struggling little economy and sleepy little country that was just getting along at that time in terms of being able to live off the kibbutzim has become an amazing country that is the leader in technology. It's been a remarkable short period of time in which Israel has become one of the most entrepreneurial nations in the history of mankind. People can give all kinds of explanations. I think for many of us, there's only one explanation, and that is there is a God. He has chosen this land for His people, and He has kept His hand on this land and His people. And anyone who believes He will not continue to do that will live to regret that false and foolish belief. And this is what John Kerry doesn't understand. So I say to my friends in Israel, be grateful for the wonderful history that you have. Never shy from it. Proclaim it joyfully and proudly, because it is a history that not only explains where you have been, but is the only explanation to explain to the world where you, in fact, will continue to go. Your history is powerful. The UN resolution of last week was an act of hate and contempt toward Israel. I find it interesting that in 2016, the United Nations dealt with resolutions that brought some level of condemnation to Syria one time, to Iran one time, to North Korea one time, to Russia one time, to Israel 20 times. 20 times. Think about that for a moment. If the United Nations can ignore the slaughter of people in Syria, the total disregard for human rights in North Korea, the intense sponsor of terrorism in Iran, and now their hell-bent desire to build a nuclear device which only an idiot would believe they don't intend to weaponize. The fact that Russia has at will invaded other sovereign countries and annexed them, and all of those countries have received but one rebuke from the so-called United Nations, and Israel has been the target of 20? For what? Because it has continued to build communities and bedrooms for its own families? When there is more outrage at the United Nations for the Israelis building bedrooms in their own land for their own people than there is for the Iranians building bombs to kill all those children, there's something wrong at the United Nations. I would say to my friends in Israel, the world doesn't hate you because of where you are. They hate you because of who you are. And they hate you because of whose you are. And I want to be very clear to say, as an outsider, they're not going to hate you less if you give in to their demands. The idea that somehow Israel can make everyone love them by giving in to their demands is nonsense. Because the hate that is expressed toward Israel is not political. It ultimately is spiritual, even if the haters understand it or not. And that's why it makes no sense at all for there constantly to be this pressure for Israel to give up the tiny little speck of land that it lives in and owns for the sake of a few. I carry around with me, and I showed it on television last week, and I got quite a response. You can't see it from where you are because it's a small little map. But this little map, if you can see the green area, this represents all of the Muslim nations that exist around the continents between Asia and Africa. And there's quite a bit of landmass. In fact, so much that you can clearly see the green versus anything else. What you probably can't see unless you're really close to me is right there in that tiny little speck. And it's so tiny you can't see it. There's a little bitty red dot. That's Israel. Most Americans have no clue what you face geographically. But I hold this up as a reminder that when people talk about a two-state solution, here's what they're basically suggesting. That the people to whom God gave this land over 3,000, almost 4,000 years ago, the people who live here and who have rights to this land, not only legally, religiously, biblically, politically, indigenously, but those people who have that little red dot should give up some of that red dot instead of any of those folks in that great big green territory giving up anything. And that somehow that makes sense. So I mentioned that this is a homeland. And the idea that somehow there should be more of surrender of the homeland to bring peace has no basis historically, legally, politically, biblically, or indigenously. And in fact, as has been mentioned several times by members of the Knesset, the reminder of what happened at Gush Katif and the subsequent actions coming out of Gaza with Hamas, and my wife and I came here in 2014 during the war that Hamas launched against Israel as a way to say thank you to Israel for standing up and defending yourself. This is your homeland. So to those who would believe that there should be a, quote, two-state solution, just reminder, a two-state solution is what diplomats propose to keep themselves busy rather than facing the reality that trying to split up Yerushalayim is really like asking Solomon to cut the baby in half. Solomon knew better, and we should as well. In America, we just went through an election that defied all odds. Some would call it a miracle.
Yeah.
For some of us, it was only half a miracle. The miracle would have been that I would have been elected president. But as the Rolling Stones so brilliantly opined in that great theological treatise, you can't always get what you want. Many of us have said to Donald Trump, and I'm proud to have supported him after I was out of the race, proud to call him a friend, and proud to say I think he's going to be a great president. But many of us have said to him, go big and go bold. Do not let the people in Washington drag you into their quagmire of inaction and nothingness. In America, there is a statement that we often use that says, go big or go home. I would say to Israel, you too are at an important point. Just as America needs to go big and go bold, I would say to Israel, go big, and you already are home. That what makes us unique as a people, whether it's Jewish or for me, I'm not Jewish, maybe the only person in the room who isn't, I'm a Christian. But the one thing I understand is this, all freedom is at its root a matter of faith. Without faith, there is no freedom, because only with faith and a sense of a responsibility to someone other than myself and other people, a responsibility to God, does any real sense of duty, honor, and dignity exist. Why has Israel been effective and successful? I believe it's because at your roots and foundation, there is the faith that you are here by God's hand and not your own. If you keep that, I believe God's blessing is so enormous that no hand will ever be able to come against you. I truly believe that. And believe, as many of my fellow Christians in America do, that those who bless Israel will be blessed, and those who curse Israel will be cursed. I would tell anybody in the world, say what you will about Israel, but I'd never bet against her. Thank you very much.